Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rounders, A History of Baseball in America. I'm your host, Jeff Lambert. Today, I'm joined by Jeffrey Orens, who's the author of Selling Baseball, How Superstars George Wright and Albert Spalding Impacted Sports in America. We're going to talk about the first individuals to really find ways to methodically popularize the sport in ways we don't really think about as much today. And I'm excited to get into that with you, Jeff. So thank you for coming on the show.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Now, I've had a lot of authors come on the show to talk about just different angles they've taken with books they've written. You chose to draw into, I think, an interesting part of baseball history. You talked about the business side a lot in this book. What drew you to wanting to talk about that aspect of baseball?
You know, when you talk about baseball, a lot of people get caught up in the performance of the players and how the teams do, and that's all good stuff. That's what the game's all about. But as it turns out, as I looked into history of baseball, I found these two guys whose paths crossed time and time again, George Wright and Albert Spalding. And, you know, we know Albert Spalding because of Spalding and Brothers.
Right.
We don't really know much about him, or as much as a ball player, and he was a Super Bowl player. George Wright, no one really has heard of these days, yet he was the superstar of superstars in the 1860s and 1870s.
Right.
And when I saw what really the overlap was with those guys, certainly it was they were great ball players. But beyond that, it was that they were in the sporting goods business,
Right.
Each of them in their own way, going after not only baseball goods, but sporting goods of all different types. And what really struck me was, well, here was a real parallel path that was being taken by these guys. It was, hey, let's play ball. We love it and we're great at it. But after we do play ball, what are we going to do with the rest of our careers? And a large portion of that for both of them was to look at sporting goods as a way to access everything that they knew about playing baseball in a way that was profitable to them and to others. And then that was a segue into sporting goods of all different types. So to me, it seemed like a great opportunity to look at baseball and then look at the sporting goods industry and a combination of those two.
I want to start off by just setting a baseline because you talk about these two gentlemen a lot in the book. Obviously, it's in the subtitle. Albert Spalding, let's start with him. He shows up a lot. For folks who don't know who he was, how did he shape the game beyond just making the gear, you know, the Spalding name that we're all familiar with?
Absolutely. It's a good point. So Albert Spalding was the first great pitcher in professional baseball. Now, up until the early 1870s, the sport was an amateur sport. It was an amateur sport, and people played it for fun and camaraderie and exercise and all those good things about sports. But beyond that, Spalding was a pitcher like no other. He was a guy, by the way, pitching was done in an underhand fashion.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
In the 1860s, the way you threw the ball was a straight underhand pitch, no curve balls, that type of thing. And Spalding was really good at this. What was interesting was he had a height advantage. He grew to 6 feet 1 inches when the average ball player was 5'8" or 5'9".
Right.
So being a big guy, he could get a lot of velocity on the ball when he put his mind to it, and his pitching motion was great to do that. But not only was he a good pitcher with speed, he had pinpoint control. And so the guy was able to pinpoint where a fastball was going to show up and then fool you with a change of pace the next pitch. And you were left a little baffled by the whole thing. He was a player that basically got professional baseball off on the right foot related to being such a strong player. And he played against the famed Cincinnati Red Stockings of 1869, who went undefeated. He pitched against them 4 times and he lost each time. But the next year when he came up against them, he was pitching for a team called the Forest Cities of Rockford, Illinois. And Those guys had a good team, but the difference usually was the pitcher in the game because they all could hit. So the idea was Spalding going to be able to rise to the occasion or not? And he pitched in 1870 against them 4 times. He won the last time by pitching a six-hitter. And a six-hitter back in 1870 was like almost pitching a no-hitter because everyone got a hit and multiple hits. And what he showed the guys on the Cincinnati team was he had come of age as a pitcher. Well, Cincinnati folded the end of 1870, and two brothers who were stars on the team, one was the manager, Harry Wright, and his brother George Wright was all everything George Wright, who was an outstanding player. He basically was a guy who could do it all and play shortstop like no one else could. Those Wright brothers saw the pitcher that they wanted for their next team, which was in the Professional League of Baseball, the first one, a National Association of Professional Baseball Players, or they just called it the NA, the National Association. And they brought him along to Boston, along with the nickname the Red Stockings that they took from the Cincinnati team because they'd folded. And those guys formed the first dynasty in professional baseball. They won 4 titles in 5 years, and they were pretty much unbeatable. So before Spalding really became the mogul in sporting goods that we all know him for, he was a star pitcher like no other. In 5 years, he won over 200 games. Think of a 200-game winner today. How many, 10 years at 20 wins a year to get to 200? Here in 5 years, this guy won 204 games. So he really was a superlative player.
Let's go over to George Wright. So we got Albert Spalding, we got George Wright. How much did he mean to the game as it was developing here at the end of the 1800s? What would the average fan have thought of him?
Many of them called him the king of baseball. It's a great nickname to have, but you have to have some pretty good statistics to back that up. And George Wright did. He was a fielder like no other because he was a natural athlete that a lot of people who play baseball know someone like this. No matter what he does it in a superlative way, whether it's fielding, whether it's hitting, whether it's base running. This guy could do it all. And the reason he could was he had such natural ability. He could run with blazing speed. He could hit for power. He could lay down a bunt. He was ambidextrous. So when he fielded, playing a position of shortstop, he had a huge range. He could go to his right, his left equally well. Then when he grabbed the ball, he'd throw it with pinpoint accuracy with either hand to first base. So this guy was the superstar in the 1860s, late 1860s and early 1870s. He'd be a combination of someone like a Derek Jeter on defense, not a bad fielder, and add maybe Aaron Judge on offense. So you'd add all that together, and this guy was the guy that people wanted to see. And they'd plunk down a dime, or maybe it was a quarter, to go see a game in 1869 or 1870, which was parting with a fair amount of money back then. So if you were going to do that, you wanted to see a ball player who really could do it all, and this guy could.
You write about the first big efforts to sell baseball to the public. How did early team owners and promoters get people in the stands with this first effort to really try and commoditize the sport?
The idea was to try to balance professionalism with delivering a product that people really wanted to take a look at. And when I say deliver a product, they didn't just want to see an individual play. They wanted to see teamwork. They wanted to see a team that was ready to win because they had a number of good players, no doubt, but they were coached and managed in a way that could give a superlative effort every time they went on the field. And that's where Harry Wright came in. George's brother was an extremely good manager. He knew how to plan ahead. He'd figure out how to coach his team so they'd be ready for different situations, be able to play as a team to take advantage of what their skills were and win on a teamwork basis. And that was unheard of back in the 1860s and early 1870s until Harry brought it along. And then everyone else saw, gee, maybe we ought to be doing this. Maybe we ought to be practicing before a game rather than just go out there and see what we could do individually. So they had to deliver a product that was worthy of a dime, a quarter, maybe even 50 cents for a game.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you needed to have a well-coordinated effort. The other thing that they did was they tried to make sure that they had not one star that they built their team around. They wanted to have a couple of infielders who really could get the job done. They wanted some speedy outfielders. They want a superlative pitcher out there tossing the ball for them. And Harry Wright was able to put that together. It's interesting, though, after 5 years in the first professional league, people were seeing that the Boston Red Stockings were so good that they were going to win every time they went out to play. In fact, in 1875, when they won their fourth title in a row, they won 70 games out of the 80 that they played, and they didn't lose at home. Every home game was a win. The Boston fans started to get tired of that. They knew that every time they went to the ballpark,
It's a win.
Harry Wright's team was going to win, and they wanted to see some competition. It's funny, Al Spalding, who was such a great pitcher on that team, he said to himself, it's time for me to move on. He said, I'm at the top of my game, and we could keep doing this year in and year out, but I want to bring competition into the game. I want to get the game on a level that's a little bit more professional than it is now. And by that, I mean, I want to clean it up a little bit. These guys are drinking, many of them. They're gambling. And I want to clean all this up. And he found a guy out in Chicago, a guy named William Hulbert, who was on the organizational group of the Chicago White Stockings, who felt the same way. They got together, and Spalding basically worked with Hulbert to form the National League. And the National League was a step above and beyond what the NA was, because the National League not only decided they wanted to clean up the sport, they wanted to reorganize it around two factions in a club rather than one. It's not just about the players now. It's about the players delivering a product that's going to be superlative on the field. And there's going to be an organization that backs them up that takes care of all the logistics and the finances and everything that the players used to worry about. Now they don't have to anymore. They can focus on playing baseball, which was great. That was a nice division of labor. The only problem with that was once you get an organization together that's not focused on playing, but focused on logistics and maybe finances, what they want to do is get an unequal situation going. I'm not quite going to pay the players what they're worth. I'm going to hold down our salaries a little bit. And the owners got together, and after 4 or 5 years, they colluded and formed what was the first iteration of the reserve clause. It was called the reserve system, where you could put 5 players on this roster that all the other organizations agreed they wouldn't touch, so that players who used to every year negotiate for their next year's salary with any team that wanted to negotiate with them, well, that wasn't going to be allowed now with this collusion that was going on. The top 5 players had to negotiate with their own team, or they'd have to sit out a season. Oh my God, that's a completely different story than anything they had ever seen before. And it was quite a situation there. And it was the beginnings of something that took, well, when did the reserve clause finally get busted? In the 1970s, over 100 years later. So you look at that situation, and there was the good and there was the bad, right? And, you have to take a little of both when you're playing, and they did, but it was quite a tussle for a while related to finding a medium that would work for both the players and the owners and of course the fans, right? The people who wanted to see the game.
Were there any strategies to promote baseball as a product back then that you think the sport has lost that might work now?
It's interesting. It's a good question. Uh, the teamwork approach today you take for granted, but by the same token, um, I don't know if with the individual focus on salaries being such a big part of what goes on today, if they're taking away from some of that teamwork approach that fans would really enjoy. You know, you hate to see someone like Juan Soto leave the Yankees, right? But if Hal Steinbrenner wasn't willing to pay $765 million or so, that just wasn't going to happen. And Soto had to leave because he had to run his own team. That was the thing for him. I
Right.
mean, he could have stayed and been Aaron Judge's sidekick, right? Like Lou Gehrig to Babe Ruth, but he needed to move along. Well, those situations are few and far between, but a lot of the people who end up negotiating on their own for salaries sometimes give up some of the teamwork approach in what they're trying to do. And that was the thing that made baseball so worthwhile in the early professional days. The teams that you could get behind, you knew those guys were going to be working together as a team, and managers were all about making those teams work the way they did. So maybe that's something that's being lost in the individual salary negotiations that are happening today.
It's an interesting it's an interesting perspective you put forward, Jeff, because I think about, I'm a high school teacher. I look at my kids who still pay attention to professional sports. It's become a very individualized fandom. When I was growing up, I feel like most of my friends, we cheered for our hometown team. We cheered for the Red Sox and we loved the players second. It feels like things have switched a little bit in recent years where it's more about the players on the team that are followed as opposed to the franchise. And maybe there's
Right.
something missing there. Is that something you've observed as well?
Well, that's sort of what I'm feeling with the salaries getting out of hand, and that seems to be the driver. And I'm not exactly sure how to get it back, but I think there's a need to be that rooting for the team, not necessarily for the individual.
Yes, yes. Something to keep an eye on, certainly, as the years go on.
Sure.
While I was reading the book, I was surprised to read about women's baseball clubs in the 1800s. I always knew that there was some existence, but you did a good job bringing out more of that information. What did you find most interesting about women's involvement in the early game as you researched?
Well, the point about women being involved was that early on, before baseball was professional,
Yep.
in the 1840s and 1850s, as baseball was just starting to form, it was really based on children playing games of bat and ball. And women were just as involved as kids as men were when they were boys. And so women felt they were sort of pushed aside when professional ball started to happen. They actually wanted to continue playing. And in some college atmospheres, women did do that for a time. But what happened was the really the sentiment of the day was that women physically were not going to be up to the task of playing baseball, even if it was just women playing women. And many scientists and doctors back then felt that women might actually damage themselves related to being able to reproduce and all sorts of particulars if they played strenuous physical sports. So it was sort of an unwritten rule in by the 1860s, mid 1860s, late 1860s, that a woman playing baseball wasn't really going to continue. It was an oddity that continued as almost a sideshow for a number of years. If you wanted to get um, a good draw at a game. You might have two women's teams play before the game started. That type of thing. It was for the novelty of it, rather than women who could actually play baseball. And who had grown up playing one form of a bat and ball game, just like guys did. So it was a stark division that took place there. And as we know, it never really got around to closure for women until men went off to war in the 1940s and women started to play baseball again in large numbers in leagues that actually drew paying customers. So there was quite a gap there, wasn't there? And it's interesting. It's unfortunate. Women continued to follow baseball because there's a large portion of the female population that loves a good game of baseball just like guys do. So it's unfortunate that really they were pushed off to the side to not be able to play.
Another interesting aspect of your book was we think of player endorsements as a modern thing, but they really do go way back. What were some of the earliest and wildest examples that you remember coming across in your research of taking this approach?
The earliest was um, a team approach in terms of sporting goods companies coming out with cards, baseball cards, that were a crude version of what they are today. But the Cincinnati Red Stockings of 1869 were put in a pack of cards, if you will, and an image was particular of the 1869 Red Stockings that Peck and Snyder, a large sporting goods company, put in some of their goods to start to show to people that baseball is something to get familiar with on a commercial basis. Shortly after that, George Wright, who was playing for the Boston Red Stockings, started to advertise his image. A cigar company in Boston paid him for the rights to his image to advertise Red Stocking cigars, the best smoke in town in Boston, right? And so there'd be a picture of George, and he was in his uniform. He had a bat in hand, and the subliminal message, he didn't say anything in a cartoon blurb above his head,
Right.
but the subliminal message was, George Wright, best player in baseball. Red Stocking cigars, best smoke in town, right? Make that connection, and away you go. So that was the beginning. That was the first athletic advertisement of that sort in 1874. Right after that, people started to look at other ball players. And in the 1880s, there were advertisements with a guy named Cap Anson, Adrian Anson, who was Mr. Everything related to hitting in the 1880s for the Chicago White Stockings. He and another couple of other guys were advertising beer, and they would be seeing their image. And so, beer advertisements along with cigars, you can see the images that started to come out there, and they were classic male baseball images. Smoke a cigar, have a beer, and look at these guys, the best in baseball are advertising for them. So that's sort of how it got started.
You also talk in your book about how smart early baseball promotion was at getting newspapers and books involved in building a mythology around the game. How much of
It
early
was
baseball do you think was real and accurate, and how much of it do you think was smart PR?
it's always a combination, right? When you take a look at what's being done, there's a little bit of smart PR in everything related to how to get a message out there. The idea, though, of advertising through an official league baseball book was a very important thing, a baseball guide, because the baseball guides not only showed you what the rules and regulations were of playing a game, but they also showed you how do you throw a curveball when curveballs were coming into vogue? How do you lay down a bunt? How do you perform a hook slide. And they were written, those particular items, by the guys who were specialists in those areas. So you'd get the top guys in the sport writing these types of articles, and they'd be included in the official baseball guide that Spalding would put out. And his guide would be something along the lines of, let me give you the rules and regulations of baseball. Then let me give you some tips on how to play it better. And oh, by the way, the last portion of my guide will be, here are the sporting goods that I have to offer so that you too can play with the best equipment that's out there.
Right.
So he had a real nice combination of things that he would put together. And think if you're an immigrant, you've just come off the boat and you're living in New York City, and you see this game being played and you don't really know what it is, but you know you want to be part of it because that's what Americans are doing. They're playing this sport. How do you learn about it? For 10 cents, you can buy this guide that's 250 pages. You can buy the equipment that they have listed there. You can learn about how to play the game, what the rules and regulations are, and then tips from guys who are telling you how to play it better. And if you don't even know how to speak English, you'll get someone to read it to you, and you'll learn English along the way as well. I mean, this was a combination that was tough to beat in terms of how do you, as someone new on the scene, fit in to America? And with cultural and civic pride, you're proud to be an American and play the national game. So it was a very subtle way to get messages across that I think Spalding did probably better than anyone. He was great at it.
That he was.
Yeah.
In that vein, what's something about early baseball marketing that would surprise fans today?
So early on in the sport, of course, there wasn't much beyond a bat and a ball and bases. Not even a uniform. You'd wear work pants and a cap and a shirt, and you were ready to play baseball. But as time went on, things started to get a little more specialized and more supportive of what the players needed in order to move forward in a way that supported organized baseball and the health of the ball players. So all that led towards protective equipment. They didn't have anything. They didn't have a glove. They didn't have a catcher's mask. They didn't have shin guards. They didn't have any of these things that would protect ostensibly the most vulnerable position in the sport, the catcher, or the guys who caught the ball on a continual basis, the infielders, the catcher who caught the ball, the first baseman especially, everyone's throwing the ball to him. And the thing I loved about Spalding was he was an unabashed supporter of wearing a glove when no one else really wanted to wear a glove. Oh, it's unmanly. You're a wimp if you wear a baseball glove. He had pitched so often, the ball being thrown back to him, and his hand was killing him. When he couldn't throw a curveball, he moved himself as manager of the Chicago White Sox. He moved himself to first base. And he played first base because he could still hit and he could still field, but his hand was still killing him. And he decided, rather than wear what some baseball players were starting to wear, which was a flesh-colored workman's glove with the fingertips cut off. You could barely see it. They wore it for protection of their palms, right? Well, he wore a jet black glove. He wanted everyone in the stands to see that he was wearing a glove when all these other guys were saying, hey, wait a minute. I'm not going to wear a glove. I'm not a wimp. I don't want to do that. He said to himself and to his brother, who was partner in his business, this is a whole untapped market, and I'm going to make it our market. People are going to see me, and they're going to fuse the heroic aura of Albert Spalding, pitcher, first baseman, with this product that he's wearing that you too can wear. It protects your hand. It's good for you, just like it's good for the superstar that's Albert Spalding. that type of marketing, that marketing genius is just, you don't find it often. From there, think about baseball now. When you are a kid and you go to play baseball, yeah, someone brings along a baseball, maybe someone has a bat or two, and they bring it along. Everyone has a glove. You want to have your own glove, right? You break it in, that sort of stuff. Well, it all started as a piece of protective equipment. Now it's an offensive weapon because of the size and the mitt itself and the way it's constructed. But back then, it was just to protect your hands from being battered on a continual basis. So a complete switch to a piece of equipment that everyone who plays baseball has to own. A great way of marketing.
And we see that even still resonate today. I think about the recent popularity of the oven mitt used by players, stealing bases, and how
Sure,
popular that has become. It's been a trickle down sensation all the way down to youth
absolutely.
leagues where, Mom,
Yep.
I need to get this protective piece for my hand. Didn't even exist 5 years ago, I think.
Terrific. Think of Spalding as the first guy to do that, right? So fantastic stuff. On the flip side, George Wright did the same thing for catchers. George Wright had a piece of equipment before there was a catcher's mask and before anyone had any protective equipment. It was a rubber plate that you put in your mouth and you shoved it up against your front teeth to hope that it would keep them in place if a foul ball comes screaming off the bat and hits you in the face. At least you're going to save your teeth, right? So that was called a catcher's mouth protector. And people used to use it, and catchers loved it because when you put it inside your mouth, no one knew that you were wearing a piece of protective equipment. Well, after a number of years, the catcher's mask was developed by a Harvard baseball player. And so Harvard up in Boston, George Wright, he's playing for the Boston Red Stockings, sees this mask and he goes to the guy. He says, "Hey, you've got to patent this mask. And by the way, I'd like to have the sole rights of selling this into the marketplace, so I'll pay you a royalty for your patent." And it was a great situation, and Wright was the one to see it because he had already developed a piece of protective equipment, and now this was a major step forward. So think of George Wright and the catcher's mask, think of Al Spalding and the glove, and you've got two great marketers of sports equipment.
In addition to Spalding and Wright, is there any other unsung heroes from this era that deserves more attention when it comes to figuring out how to sell baseball effectively? Someone who really moved the needle?
Well, there's a guy who not necessarily was someone who was moving the needle from an equipment standpoint. He was moving the needle from a playing standpoint, and his name was Ross Barnes. And no one's ever really heard of Ross Barnes, but Ross Barnes was the batting champion in the early professional league, 1871 to 75, and then he went with Spalding to the Chicago White Stockings, and he was the batting champion of the National League. And this guy could play a game and hit like no other. And the reason he could wasn't because he was a big guy. He was 5 feet 8 inches tall. But the guy knew how to play with the rules that were out there. And one of the biggest rules out there was called fair foul hitting. You could actually hit a ball that started out in fair territory in the infield, and if it crossed into foul territory before it went past first or third base, it was still considered a fair ball.
Right.
It was in play. And this caused all sorts of problems for the infielders who are chasing after these balls. They're going all over the place. Because if you know how to hit fair foul hitting, you can put spin on the ball that just makes it take off when it hits the ground. And Ross Barnes was better at this than anyone. So in addition, he could hit for power and he could place the ball. So the guy was a threat like no other. In the 1870s, in the first 5 years of professional baseball, He won the batting title twice by hitting over 400, and then he did it again in the first year in the National League. He hit over 400 and won the batting title. And it's because he knew how to use the rules. Then everything changed in 1877. They regulated the game such that fair foul hitting was no longer afforded an opportunity to these hitters. And this was his bread and butter. This is how he made a living. Once that happened, his batting average went into the 250s, 260s. A couple of years later, he got ill. He never even made it out of the 1870s before he had to retire. But for a short couple of years, 5 or 6 years, this guy was a tremendous hitter. And what that did was it gave people who had ability but didn't necessarily market themselves, it gave them a way to market the game such that people could play it who might be smaller, might not have as much power, but you could play and really make a mark on the game itself. Ross Barnes, in my view, should be in the Hall of Fame. Veterans Committee should have put him in a long time ago. The reason he isn't is because he didn't play 10 full years in the major leagues, and that's the dividing line for the Hall of Fame. So this guy, he could do it all. He was a great infielder as well. He was George Wright's double play combination. Wright was shortstop, and he played second base. It's just a shame, but this guy could market skills of baseball like no one else. So if you had, Spalding talking about, hey, write an article about fair foul hitting, this would be the guy. And the way you did it, it was just interesting. You drop the bat down severely on the ball. You almost chop it, and it puts a tremendous amount of spin on it and sends it flying. And he was an ace at that. He could do it all.
Are there any players or companies that exist now that you see as carrying on the spirit of Spalding and Wright in terms of innovators for promoting the game today?
I would have hoped, frankly, that Spalding and Brothers would have been that. Spalding Brothers is out of baseball. They used to have a lock on the National League contract. I mean, Spalding formed the National League with William Hulbert, and for 100 years he sold baseballs exclusively to the National League. Spalding now is a company that's involved in volleyball and basketball, and doesn't really have much involvement in baseball, unfortunately, right? And you've seen the market, for better or worse, it's splintered into a number of different suppliers, and some of them you recognize from years gone by if it's Wilson or something like that. But I think it's good that there is this competition, because really it's good for all of us who play the game as well as watch the game, because we want a competitive market out there, and it's nice to see that there's that competitive market. So not so much for the professional game anymore. I think it's good that there are a number of entrepreneurs who are out there, and I love the idea of a torpedo bat that's going to be sold by who knows who, right? And those types of innovations are great. And how about the guys, as you say, who put on the sliding glove, the mitt that's oversized or whatever? There are niche markets now for a number of different manufacturers. And I think that's the way things are going to go for quite a while now.
Jeff, where can people pick up a copy of your book?
So my book is published by Rowman and Littlefield. And Rowman and Littlefield is selling either online direct. So you can go online, Rowman and Littlefield, Rowman.com, look for my book title, Selling Baseball, and you can go from there and get the book. Amazon as well, Barnes and Noble online, all the usual online suspects. Rowman and Littlefield's model for this is to sell online. And it's worked quite well so far. And it's only been out for a couple of months. It's gotten a nice review from a book list, a starred review. There's some momentum building. Yeah, so I'm excited about it. But at the end of the day, this is an online play. So I encourage anyone to go online to these places, Roman.com, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Target, and get it that way.
And I'll make sure for listeners and viewers, I'll put links in the show notes in the description so you can click and get your copy quicker that way. Jeff, how can our audience connect with you if they have a question about the book as they read it, if they want to learn more? Do you have a website, social media? How could people reach out to you with that follow-up?
Instagram, Jeffrey Orens. That's the best way to do it, and just get to me. I'd be more than happy to answer questions that you might have. And the book contains so much more related to how these two guys competed against each other, as well as were on the same team, if you will, both in baseball playing and in the sporting goods business. Because at the end of the day, spoiler alert, Spalding buys out George Wright's baseball equipment company. So they intermingle over the course of 40 years. They remained great friends, and it's a story that a lot of people don't know. So I hope people are interested in it.
Now, Jeff, you also wrote a book about Marie Curie and Albert Einstein before this, correct?
I did.
What's you've that's a big jump, Albert Einstein, Marie
What's the
Curie to
connection?
selling
What's the connection?
baseball. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the connection is, and I say this to everyone in all honesty, the connection is history. Okay, I'm a history buff. Okay, and whether it's I know something about science, and the Albert Einstein Marie Curie connection is a scientific one, and I'm a baseball fan for 60 years, and so I know a little bit about baseball. The combination to me that makes so much sense is the historical background that you need to research in order to get these stories out. And there's so much out there in terms of newspapers and journals and people to talk to who know interconnections there. And so that's what's helped me in both stories. They're different in many ways, but they're similar in terms of they're a history of a couple of people who had intertwining careers or lives that really bolstered what was going on in their time. Marie Curie and Albert Einstein were the preeminent scientists in the world in the early 1900s. And odds are that if you ask someone today, who's the most famous scientist you know? Einstein probably going to pop up in there, one of the top 5, I would think, because people aren't geared to science per se, but they've heard of this E = MC² thing that wasn't that Albert Einstein, or Marie Curie, and radioactivity might pop up. The discoverer of the principles of radioactivity. And she and Einstein got together in a conference and were talking about subatomic particles and how they interacted, and they were off and running from there. Their intertwining lives, here's Spalding and George Wright, and their intertwining lives. So you can sense a theme also of, I've got a couple of books that have dual biographies going down the path here. I am. There's a story that I have in mind that has a couple of people beyond just one or two, and it's about a bygone Olympics. And the Olympics, of course, every 4 years, you never know what's going to happen. There's a particular Olympics that I'm looking into, and how it affected all the Olympics in the future after it. And what's interesting about the Olympics is it's based, like early baseball, on amateur principles. But how has it evolved? It's become professional in nature. You don't limit who plays today. I mean, the best basketball team in the world is a pro team in the U.S. usually. So it's going to be an interesting sidelight to sports, but it's going to have some human drama in it as well. And that's the key. It's how do you take the human drama and fuse it with a topic that people want to know about. Sports is a pretty big topic to settle in on, and the human drama in there is, if you research it, it's wonderful to find. So that's going to be my next stop.
I'm looking forward to that. And folks, make sure I'll put a link in the show notes with the book link. Make sure you follow Jeff so you can keep up and see what that's coming out too.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Jeff, real quick, you're in New Jersey currently where you reside. I usually ask my guests, where do your loyalties lie? Who do you cheer for in the MLB?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've been a Yankee fan for a long time. I mean, 60 years. So obviously that's number one. But one of my stops along the way was in Pittsburgh. And I happened to be in Pittsburgh in the 1970s when the Pittsburgh Pirates won the World Series in 73 and 79. And I was a young guy then, and I really stuck with the Pirates. I've been a long-suffering Pittsburgh Pirate fan, and I have to tell you, year in and year out, I always have high hopes as I start out the season with those guys, and they always get crushed. But they're fun to watch, and they've got some exciting players. But in today's game, Jeff, it's all about the money. If you don't have the big bucks to be able to get those key players, a star pitcher, a power hitting outfielder or first baseman, you got to put the pieces together by spending a couple dollars, and the Pirates haven't done that in a long time. So I'll continue to follow the Yankees.
That's probably the wise bet. You and I are both, I'm down in South Florida. I see the Marlins play. Just this experience, this is neither here nor there, but I think the MLB should explore looking at a salary floor for the reason, like when you see Pittsburgh and Miami and the teams they put on the fields at such a minimum, payroll price.
And year in and year out.
Yeah.
That's the issue. So you have to find something that's going to work there. And I sort of like the idea. And the floor should be supported by the teams that make so many hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, the Yankees, the Dodgers, those guys, the Mets, they should be supporting the floor, because you got to bring some sort of parity back instead of everything moving so far distant from each other. That's what I think.
I agree. I think one of the best things Major League Baseball did was when they set up the revenue sharing system in, the late 90s, early 2000s, because all of a sudden we did see a wider range of teams making the playoffs and winning the World Series. And I look at the NBA or I look at the NFL, they tend to suffer more than the MLB does these days on getting the same teams, competing for the championship every year.
The problem I see, though, is the Dodgers right now. They have become just a team that's a stratosphere ahead of everyone else.
Yeah.
And, when you can get all the top talent from Japan because you've got Ohtani there,
right?
And Japanese top shelf talent is joining. Yep. That's going to be tougher and tougher to compete against. I think it's going to be a problem.
I agree. They're going to have to think about how these creative financial practices being done by particularly LA, but other teams are going to try this too. It's going to be interesting to see where this goes.
Mm-hmm. We'll have to watch.
On that note, I have one more question for you, Jeffrey. Do you have a prediction for who's winning the World Series in 2025 for this season?
Oh, wow. My prediction is the Mets. And the reason, and I'm not a Mets fan.
Yep.
I am a Juan Soto fan. And when he settles in, I mean, he's having problems right now. He's talking about it. I just heard him the other day. He said, I wish I had someone like Judge hitting behind me because I got better pitches and blah, blah, blah. I mean, he's got Pete Alonso, who's having a career year right now. Yep. So I look at that and I say, you don't have a slouch behind you there. But the idea is he's got to settle in. And it takes a couple of months to do that. And I think once he does, he is going to lead that team. I mean, look at who they have. They've got Lindor and they've got Alonso, and they've got just a number of players. When they hit their stride, that team, I think, I was surprised, frankly, that the Dodgers beat them that badly in the NLCS. I really thought that the Mets were going to take it. And so I'm thinking this year they might. I I'd hate to see them come up against the Yankees in the World Series because it would tear my heart out to see what happens.
Yep.
But a Subway Series would be fantastic for the game, I think.
I remember the last one. It was a lot of fun just to see that
Yes.
dynamic. And Jeff, you're not the first person on the show this year who said the Mets for the World Series. I've been
Oh.
keeping a tally, so there's some some underpinnings going here from other people as well.
Glad to hear it.